Hi, folks. I have the great honor of taking the toughest job of the evening and trying to get everybody settled down and getting ready to go. Today we are here to toast and perhaps to roast Tony. The master of ceremonies this evening is Tony's son, Alex. And Alex will take over and start running the show. So, enjoy.
Hey, Marino. So many stories, so little time. Before we do that, I do want to introduce Tony's family. You know, May, Alex, his wife, Rosalia, their daughter, Leah, Tony's brother, Don, Don's wife, Vinny. But also I want to, as the politician I am, you have to make sure that you recognize other elected officials and other friends of the family, so to speak. In the audience tonight, coming up shortly, is Senator Jim Whalen. And on the list was County Freeholder and a colleague of my father's at the SJTA, Charles Garrett, but I don't think he's arrived yet. Absecon Councilman, a longtime father, a friend of my father, Drew Fishman. Also coming in shortly should be past Galloway Township Committeewoman and a great friend of the college, Meg Worthington. We have Atlantic County United Way Executive Director John Emge. We have retired Atlantic County Administrator Helen Walsh and her husband, retired faculty Joe Walsh. Joe grew up here at the college with my father. We also have Shelby Broughton, who will be speaking later. Some of my father's friends, Jeannie Wolfram, Dennis Ritchie, Chicky and Ronnie Sinagro, Gary and Simba, and some of our neighbors who I grew up across the street, Barbara and Murray Kirsch, are here tonight. Before we begin, I do want to thank, from our family to this family, Sue Burrows, Dawn Conrady, Michael Frank, the Stockton Federation of Teachers, the Stockton Faculty Band, and I understand there's a song that's been created for Tony Marino. But before I call up our first speaker, Senator Whalen, I do want to take a moment. There's 5 individuals that are not with us tonight who my father had a great relationship with them, and I just want to give them a little plug. They are Dave Edmonds, Paul Lyons, Ken Harrison, Hal Taylor, and Ralph Bean. Those 5 individuals grew up with my father at Stockton, share a lot of stories, and we all wish they could be here tonight. And somewhere down, I know they're smiling up in heaven looking down at us, and I know they would love to be here. So I do want to mention that. Our first speaker tonight, my father is a good friend of him. He's a good friend of Stockton. He's a good friend of this community, Senator Jim Whalen.
Thank you very much, Alex. And get to go first. I don't know if that's good or bad, but it's as Alex said, I have a long friendship and relationship with Tony. It goes many years. Goes back so far. He was still a liberal Democrat at that time in his life. Not sure what happened to him. He started playing golf. His son became a Republican. The interesting thing, I was thumbing through the book back there that Dick Colby presented on some of the history of Stockton, and one of the sub-headlines was Myth or Reality, and I thought, well, that's appropriate for Tony Marino, because his great thing with the SJTA, if you follow those newspaper accounts, and Tony would always give the counts of what was happening. And we always used to say to him, this is great because nobody can argue with you. You can make this stuff up. There are 3.2 people in every single car that's going on the expressway. Who the hell can argue with that? I said, no, I think it's 3.5 people. 3.7. No, it's 3.2. Tony was the voice of authority. And, he said it. He was frequently wrong, but never in doubt. And, everybody just thought, okay, there's 3.2 people in each car. The one thing that I think Alex alluded to it and hinted at a little bit with Tony He is truly a very loyal guy. I guess this is the toast part. His loyalty to Stockton. He's one of those who came over on the Mayflower. I know there are some others in the room who go back to those days. And through the years, as he worked at SJTA and pursued other things, he always had a fondness and a partnership really with Stockton. He always continued to be part of the faculty. And that loyalty, whether it's to Stockton or to, fortunately, guys like me who are personal friends or people he's worked with at SJTA or in other capacities, that loyalty, I think, is why we are all here tonight. Plus the fact that you couldn't find anybody else to honor, so we got stuck with Tony. So thank you for the opportunity to say a few words to and about our friend Tony Marino. And Tony, thank you for being the guy that you are.
Well, I see all of Tony's friends sat up front. My father's...
He's a photographer, you know.
Yeah, I know. He's paid to be here. When Jim was talking about 3.2 cars, my father, under his breath, argued it was really 2.5. My father's commitment to community service is far and wide. He's been celebrating 29 years on community mediation. He's been honored by the United Way, not only in Atlantic County, but all of Southeast, this region. He's actually done an advertisement for the United Way of Atlantic County. So I want to bring up John Emge, Executive Director of the United Way of Atlantic County, to present my father with an interesting award.
Hi, everybody. Before the barbs start flying, I thought I would just kind of keep some positivity here going this evening. So, Tony, congratulations. It's been honored by United Way so many times. I'm kind of out of things to say, but we really appreciate so many years of involvement in our community, as Alex had mentioned in a couple ways. He was the president of our board of directors for a number of years. Went through a couple executive directors during that time, I think. Luckily, I've been here for 11 years almost, so a little different these days, as it was back then. Tony as well represented Atlantic County, your community, over the river in Philadelphia with a regional partnership of 12 United Ways in the Delaware Valley as the president of that board for a few years. So that's kind of when I first met Tony, when I was working for the United Way in Philadelphia at that time, so many years ago. Alex was referring to a little advertising. If you've seen the United Way ads, Live United, people wearing the t-shirt and all that, well, Tony is a longtime United Way volunteer and actually has spent time in recent years doing free tax returns. So if you need to get your tax returns done, go see Tony. He knows how to do them. He's certified. Maybe certifiable, one of the two. But anyway, we have a little plaque thanking Tony for his creating opportunities for inspiring others. And has Tony's picture in his Live United t-shirt that we've used on our peripheral material. So congratulations, Tony, and thank you.
You know, it's funny, there's a picture of him wearing a white shirt. So when I walked in tonight, well, first of all, my wife, I forgot to introduce my wife. Sorry, my wife, Bonnie Marino. Because when I looked over at the table, she wasn't there. She was getting me food. Were you? No? Dessert. So my wife was a little concerned. She was, what should I wear tonight? And I have to say, my wife brought me up from a J.C. Penney kind of guy, like my father, to a Brooks Brothers kind of guy. So, and I looked at my father, and I said, "Holy shit, you really dressed up tonight, didn't you?" But I forgot, black is slimming. But also, since it was Italian food, typically if you go out to eat with my father, you always get something on a shirt. So, tell you. And I must comment, as John was up here talking about my father's positions with the United Way, he corrected him right here. So that's going to be an ongoing saga tonight. So Shelby, Bill, Michael, you get ready for that. I want to bring up my sister, Leah. We talked about, I know there's already a shot taken me as a Republican, but if you've noticed, Leah tonight has an elephant pendant. So the apple does fall far from the tree. Leah.
Thanks, and of course, under the breath, he looked at me and said, "You're a Democrat." So I can't, I guess both of them can't leave. So I wanted to come here tonight. I kind of was back and forth about whether or not I wanted to talk, but let's face it, my dad and my brother can't get all the attention in Stockton. And so yes, I'm the other Marino. I happily went to Stockton day camp, and here I am today. So I guess I'll just start off because I don't know if you guys have the, yeah, I'm going to go right into the roasting. I don't know if you've had the unfortunate chance of being back and forth on Dan McMahon and Tony Marino emails. If you haven't, you're lucky. So pretty much the one topic they like to talk about a lot is David Letterman versus Jay Leno. And to me, that's so 1993. It's definitely Team Coco all the way. But I want to take some spirit from that, and so my roast is going to kind of be a Letterman-style top 10 things you may or may not have known about my father. So, and also, my dad gives really good advice, and he once said, keep it short, no one cares. So number 10. Number 10, first off, no, he is not my grandfather. Stop asking, okay? Number 9, have any of you guys ever seen his yearbook photos? I actually have asked my mom, what did you ever see in him? But, love you, I'm kidding. I mean, I get their good looks. I'm a good combo of both. But have you guys ever seen these? I mean, what a square, right? Here's another one. In fact, we actually have a St. Joe beanie at the house, so I'll put that on him later. But honestly, it doesn't seem from the photos that the 70s or 80s did much help him either. So. Number 8, a doctor had the decided to tell my dad that he had a perfect brain, as if he wasn't boasting about that before. So thanks, Doc. Now more ammunition to the fire. Number 7, my dad was in the Peace Corps. And, you know, you kind of ask, what does the Peace Corps do? Quite honestly, Venezuela doesn't seem to have had much help since my dad has been there. And actually, and in fact, I actually think that it did more help for my father because I think the one drunk night he ever admits to was at a parade in Barbados, right? So, in the fact, no, Trinidad, see, correcting. But anyway, it's come down to the Peace Corps did him some help instead of him helping Venezuela. Also, number 6, I don't know if you know, I'm a kind of a stereotypical member of the Facebook generation, through and through. Actually, I'm just curious, who here's on Facebook? All right. So anyway, I'm a total Facebook generation, and my dad isn't on it. So feel free to friend me. I'll put you on limited list, but feel free to friend me, and you can then go to him with updates about my life that he has no idea about, that he actually still learned from Dan McMahon. So feel free to friend me, and in fact, I might tag these photos on Facebook and get them out there. And you know what? He has no say in that because I can do that. Also, going off of Facebook and what I do, I'm in social media, so I'm a community manager. And oftentimes, my dad has no idea what I do. No clue. So here's what I do. I'm the community manager for a startup site, bizzy.com, bizzy.com. Please write it down. Please go home. We're building a personalized local recommendation engine, and we can use all the help we can get. Let's unlock South Jersey. Let's create the new Facebook, the new Google. Do it. Promise me. Dad, this is me doing my job. And I'm, you know what, I'm just going to keep tweeting co-founders at Twitter and he'll have no idea. And you know what, the best part is he can't criticize me because he has no idea what I do. Speaking of my dad's jobs, too, obviously we're here tonight because of his participation at Stockton. And I don't know if you guys know this, in my dad's last iteration as a professor, he had actually one of my high school ex-boyfriends in his class. And, you know, I got to see his class list before he went to class. And my dad, being my dad, goes in on the first day and just, you know, use that intimidated method that I guess a lot of you professors do to really just make sure your class is in the right state of mind. And my dad just looks at at Mike Stewart and says, who's Mike Stewart? He raises his hand and he starts saying, you went to St. Joe Preps. Just start saying these things professors should not know about you. And in the end, he's, after I guess a few questions, and I know this because Mike Stewart called me that night, but, he just looked him dead in the eye and said, you dated my daughter. And really, that must be a hard thing to hear when you're in class, but really, I think Mike won it over, because if you know my dad, he very seldomly gives out A's, and Mike Stewart was one of those guys to get an A. So not only did he prove my dad wrong and really show him up, now the whole class knew my horrible taste in men. So thanks, Dad. Also, my dad tells a lot of stories about hanging in the street corners of Philadelphia with especially Mook Madden. I'm convinced to this day that really Mook was the one hanging on the street corners picking up the chicks, and Dad, reading War and Peace does not qualify hanging on the street corners, okay? And then my dad also really, really loves the Roman Empire and the Civil War. Fortunately for us, my dad has never gone into war. And in fact, the only battle that my dad has gone into is sharing dessert. It's true. And actually, my oldest nephew, Patrick, and I can hold our own, and he will surrender. But also, we also had a fight, I think, over food at brunch last week. Yes, thanks, Dad. And I want to thank you for really protecting the food over protecting your own daughter from mockingbirds that attack. Thank you. Thanks, Dad. And then lastly, this is the main point, and I think Waylon hit on this a bit. My dad loves data. Like, it's kind of bizarre how often he loves data. And I think one of my favorite memories, my most hated memories, is after every single party I came back from the age of 5 to now, it's always the question of, how many people were at the party? And it's like, Dad, I don't know, I was having too much fun to count. How about that? So, but despite that, despite 30 plus years of electric bills written on legal pads, which we have them, my favorite data set, and one of the best things about my dad, is that he has statistics on Halloween. And yeah, so I just want to let you all know that my father has proven that global warming is indeed happening, and that our neighborhood is not as popular as it once was. So thank you, Dad. Only you. Only you. And so thank you very much for letting me share the mic tonight and tell you some things you may or may not have known about my father.
Well, I'm done. Leah took all my notes. When she talked about data, Halloween, seriously, if you really want to be put to sleep, look at the Brookside Farms, Murray, Barbara. Look at the data from what, 1979 when we moved in there? And he's got the temperature. And the time. So it's pretty interesting. A couple things you may not know about my father. He was once an altar boy. And today he's agnostic. Atheist, well, who cares? Whatever, it's the same thing, right? See, if I said he was a server, he would have been this. Did you know, and this, some of you will find this hard to believe, my wife did. He did not speak until he was 5. And boy, has he been making up for it. But you know what his first pet was? What talks a lot? Not a parrot. Back in the 50s, parrots in Philadelphia, North Philly, they didn't even say. It was a parakeet named Joey, I think it was. Yeah, parakeet named Joey. Now, an interesting thing about my father with Bonnie, he has a great relationship with our 3 kids. He had a great relationship. He has a great relationship with Leah and myself. But him with dogs and birds. He had a parakeet named Joey. His mother and his father were scared one day when the parakeet flew out. Oh my God, Vera, his mother, Vera. The parakeet got out. Oh, my God. My dad comes home. How were you, 10, 11 or something? He's going to correct me anyway, so I just threw it in. He starts whistling. A bird comes down, hops right on his shoulder. So he's got an incredible, he's like the bird whisperer, the dog whisperer. My father, go figure. Leah talked about the Peace Corps. Yeah. 2 years of his life that I don't think JFK envisioned why he created the Peace Corps to send my father to Venezuela. My father came back, and if he could tell JFK, he would tell this: shit really does flow downhill. My father's responsibility in Venezuela, an old barrio in Venezuela, was to build a latrine, to build their sewer system. And sure enough, he dragged his wife 25 years later, well, 35 years later. He went and saw that. And damn it, it still works. Did you know my father actually raced the train from 30th Street Station in Philadelphia here? Not in Egg Harbor City, but to Atlantic City, just to prove a point. So much that if you remember watching Action News, Channel 6 with Don Pollock, he's a little freaky, little wild guy, he wanted to call him up and wear an aviator's hat and goggles. Thank God he didn't, because I would probably be reliving that here tonight. I want to bring up Shelby Broughton right now and then Bill Daly, because those two folks remember my father back in the 1970s when my father was about a 29-year-old punk, North Philly. We'll get into a little bit more of how my father had a watershed history in the 1960s with the free speech movement and racial injustices. Those are interesting stories. But right now I want to bring up Shelby Broughton, and if you don't know Shelby, he's a great individual. Shelby?
Thank you very much, Alex. I'm here to tell a couple of stories. One about Tony's style and character, which I have always thought was exceptional, and the other is how he invited me to speak in his general studies course, Human Sexuality. I'm also going to put this in perspective by talking about things that are approaching 40 years ago, 1971, and it really is astonishing. I feel like I've been beamed up on the Starship Enterprise for a while, and I've just been downloaded, and holy moly, what happened to everybody? It is the passage of time in the aging process is extraordinary. But what I notice is that all of you are pretty damn vigorous, and Tony is not the least among them. We were part of that mysterious crowd called Mayflower faculty, and it is astonishing that we behaved the way we did, because the college has moved on in other directions that have value and merit in and of themselves. But we were an extraordinary lot. Tony and his first wife Betsy and little Alex lived adjacent to me in the Cedar Springs apartment in Summers Point. Pat Hecht, who was in theater arts, was in the same building. Was that G building? I was in G. And I got to know them well. I was single at the time. I had not yet met the woman that I eventually married, and I was a long-haired, dope-smoking hippie. That's basically what it was. And I was a professor of organic chemistry. Tony and I both did graduate work at Cornell, so we had that much in common. I finished my PhD in organic chemistry there and went on to do postdoctoral work at Baylor University. And we met in this extraordinary place, which we both had affection for then and still, and I think I'll never lose it. So that's part of how we came to know one another. You have to remember there were 55 faculty at the time, and that there were divisions rather than schools, and that collectively we created the curriculum at Stockton College because there was none. There was a prospectus that indicated how things might proceed, but we met the summer prior to opening and 2 weeks before the actual beginning of the term, and we created the curriculum. Bill Daly presented a course called Revolution and Revolutionaries, and it got picketed on the boardwalk, for example, for doing something that was so unpatriotic. Very extraordinary times. The particular story is all 55 of us would meet in what was originally A Wing, and we would interact with and at times confront the first president, Dick Bjork, because there was a constant creative mix that was underway. Tony would stand up and say to Bjork, "I want your job!" And I said, I like that man. I really like people who have a presence, and I like men who have balls. And Tony has never been bashful. I admire his public manner. He eventually, of course, became part of what is called the Stockton Mafia. That is, he infiltrated the structure of Atlantic County, as many of you know. We jointly appeared in a special edition of the Atlantic City magazine called the Stockton Mafia and the Stockton Brain System. And for some reason or other, we were highlighted for our eccentric contributions that distinguished us from ordinary college faculty. Given that background then, Tony is teaching a general studies course, Human Sexuality. And he asked me out of the blue, Shelp, I want you to speak in my course. What am I going to say? He said, you know, we have a lot of adult students. We have a lot of criminal justice cops sitting around. We have people who are unconventional, and they're not used to hearing sex spoken about in direct, plain language. And he says, I want you to introduce the F word. You know, and I thought about that story today. Alex asked me spontaneously, did I want to speak tonight? So I'm really speaking very extemporaneously, wholly unprepared, and I love to do that. And so if it were modern times, we would be from that instant messaging, YouTube commentary kind of language that starts with OMG. But OMG has been replaced with WTF, dude. And so it is that F that I am talking about. That WTF, man. How do you introduce that? How do you introduce that word? I'm not sure that it's less explosive today than it was then. And I thought about, could I really say that to this crowd tonight? This gathering in this emergency rescue place? Would we have to call the ambulance on anybody and give some thought to it? So how did I approach this? I said to this group of mixed students of all age, I said, you know, we got so many euphemisms for what we now call the F-bomb. We didn't call it the F-bomb in those days. We call it making love. We call it sleeping together. We call it getting laid. That's the most extraordinary term of all. It sort of suggests that in some passive way you're laid out. like al dente spaghetti or something. You're getting laid. And I said, none of this is quite right. I mean, I said, my language people tell me it's got an explosive, fricative sound. You know, I'm thinking the very word fricative is itself onomatopoetic almost for the word itself. So I would, you know, dance all around this. I could see men and women beginning to squirm. Oh my God, is it going to say it? Is he not going to say it? And all the while, Tony you were just loving every minute of it, right? And so I finally said, it's like this rock and roll group, I think they call the Fish, and they had something called the Fish Cheer, and they danced, right? Am I right? I just pulling this out of the memory box. And the Fish Cheer, you would know, right? The Fish Cheer. There's only one way to say the Fish Cheer. So after dancing, I said, the word is fuck! And then Tony would take over. So I thank you for inviting me to your class.
Thank you, Shelby. My wife asked me if she should bring the kids tonight. I said, no. Shelby brought up one of the courses that my father used to teach, human sexuality. And I forgot that the world premiere, even before it came out in theaters, was shown in my father's class. See, my father had a lot of state police folks. And the myth goes, or the story goes, that they brought in an old 8mm film of Deep Throat. Come on, you guys. This is a liberal audience. This is not the conservatives like me. But, yeah, my father showed the world premiere. It was in Sea Wing. The world premiere of Deep Throat. And I became a Republican. You know, before we bring up Bill Daley, going over a little history of my father, because, you know, some of you don't. Some of you commented to Sue, and Sue and I talked about, some of you weren't sure, you knew who Tony was. So I worked out with Tim Harrisine that make sure you fill out your voucher and Tim signs it. Your stipend for coming tonight will be in your next pay. I worked it out with Human Resources. So everything's right. The other thing is, Shelby talked about Dick Bjork, and I don't know who's going to go into it, and I'll leave it to last. Maybe Dan will talk about an incident that happened in Louis' Bar with Dick Bjork's wife and my father, but we won't go there right now. My father, growing up in the 60s, before he went to the Peace Corps, he did Peace Corps training out at UC Berkeley and at the Sierra Nevadas in California. And my father always likes to tell me a story that he appeared on the cover, I think it was the cover of Life magazine, or what? Look. See, whatever I say, he's going to. And there's a I have to get to my notes because I did a research from it. There's a picture of Mario Savia on top of a police car with Jack Weinberger in the police car. Who cares? And my father is a typical hand from North Philly, you know, a street corner guy, who walks up to Jack Weinberger in the car and says, "Hey, what's going on?" And it's typical of my father's fashion. You know, if there was a tiger in a cage, he wouldn't take a stick. He'd start throwing rocks. He'd start throwing everything. He's the only guy who, you know, usually it's when you're young, you worry about your parents embarrassing you. I'm 41 years old, and I still worry about it to this day. There's another episode up at his days at Cornell. And I know Paul Lyons would have loved this story, and I know my father talked to him. But some people call it the day Cornell died. It's when the black student movement took over one of the halls in April of 1969. And at that time, my father was a doctoral graduate student there, and he was on the part of the negotiating team, right? Yeah, whatever it is, I could have made it up. He's still going to correct me. And there's a scene on the cover, I think of Life magazine, right? Life, whatever. I can make it up, whatever. Look, whatever. Could have been Newsweek for all I know. Of guys coming out with guns. My father's like an inch or two off to the side. Who would have known that my father was involved with the free speech movement and racial injustice in the 1960s? You are not MLK in the least, but I know Stockton was beneficial to have you. I'm going to bring up Bill Daley here, and a couple of people were scared to follow Bill Daley. So tough. That's why I put Lee in the front and Shelby. You know, some of the other folks are coming. Good luck. I don't think Bill Daley needs any introduction, but I have to do a filler because how many hips do you have, Bill? 3, 4?
The rest of my body doing a hell of a hand character, but the titanium's in good shape.
There you go. Bill Daley, everybody.
Like Shelby, I've been, let me know if I'm not broadcasting out there, brought up here to talk about the old days. It's remarkable how often I'm brought up to talk about the old days. I want to say that, beg your pardon?
Short-term memory loss.
The short-term memory, that too. Of all of the very bright and superbly credentialed and often marginally strange people that were assembled here in the fall of 1971 to build a new college. Tony was certainly one of my favorites, and to understand the real Tony Marino before he acquired the respectability of old age, you need to understand three things. First of all, you need to understand a little bit about Tony as a personality in his younger days. Secondly, you need to understand a little something about the environment in which he was operating at Stockton. And then finally, I want to finish with some classic Marino stories that grow out of the first two pieces. Tony always struck me as being a happy warrior. I think that term was used for Hubert Humphrey. In Tony's case, it meant he was a congenital smartass. If you have any recollection of the Bruce Willis stories of the Die Hard fame, when I saw Willis for the first time in that role, I thought he reminds me of Tony Marino. In terms of the happy half, Tony had a very sensitive sensor for the funny or the ridiculous. And whenever he encountered anybody that he thought was saying something extraordinary or doing something extraordinarily stupid or ridiculous, he was unable to stop himself from explaining to them that that is what they were doing. And he felt that he had a moral obligation to call this to their attention. And the other thing is that when they took offense at that, he always seemed to be surprised. He always seemed to take the attitude, no offense intended, I just felt the need to point that out to you. And so much of the things that got him in trouble, and he was in trouble in the early days almost all of the time, were an outgrowth of something that struck him as being funny. The warrior half of the happy warrior was, and I should say this to his credit, he was absolutely fearless. We were living in an environment, well, nobody had tenure. We were living in an environment where we had a president who used to talk a lot about personnel surgery and blood on the walls during the personnel process. And that induced some of us to keep our heads a little low and our kidneys covered, but it never, ever had that impact on Tony. And his attitude was, if it just worked out that the people who were doing or saying something ridiculous happened to be, repeatedly, the high command of the college, that wasn't his fault. And he was subject to the same moral obligation to point that out to them as he would be to anybody else. So that's a picture of Tony. We'll get around to the cases in just a moment here. The environment at Stockton was an assembly of people who came off of the graduate campuses at the end of the 60s, fresh from inciting the riot at their home institution. Most of them had hair down to their butt, a banjo on their back, and they couldn't constrict their pupils in a bright light because they were on controlled substances most of the time. It was a vintage 60s faculty. On the other hand, we had a president who had also experienced the 60s, and his dominant reaction was to make sure that none of that crap went on at his school. So there was some tension building there. There's another character I have to introduce into the place I'm going to tell you in a minute, and that was the academic vice president, Woody Trombley. And Trombley was a guy, he was a gentleman of the old school, who on the one hand was infatuated with this very bright and well-credentialed faculty and thought because he was a traditionalist that faculty guys of this caliber ought to be allowed to do pretty much what they wanted to do. On the other hand, that faculty kept doing some things that were reasonably strange and that drove the president crazy. So Trombley spent most of his time shuttling back and forth between the faculty and the president, trying to keep the president from finding out what the faculty was doing. So he's the third player in most of these Marino stories. So it is that environment that was Tony Marino's playground in the early days before he acquired the respectability of old age. And now I'll tell you some vintage Tony stories here, okay? The first one is the great college council caper. Dick Bjork had a very radical 60s idea. He was going to set up the governing structure of the college so that an idea coming from anyone, a janitor, a secretary, a faculty member, or vice president, were all equal in weight. In other words, a good idea would bubble to the top regardless of where it came from. And so he assembled as his governing structure a group of people selected, as I recall, by lot from various constituencies, and then they would give him ideas and he would cream off the best of them, and everybody would be equal together. And that was, I think in his mind, I think it's fair to say that was the apple of his eye, that he was very attached to that. Now, but see, that aggravated Tony's censor for ridiculous behavior, because he was a sociologist, and he knew full well that if you had no structure below the president, if there was nothing but a flat plane below the president, and he was at complete liberty to skim off or reject any idea he wanted, and there was no delegated power below, that wouldn't result in democracy, for God's sakes. Tony said that will result in absolute tyranny. And he felt compelled to help the president understand that. So he wrote a series of articles. This is all true. I'm not making this stuff up. He wrote a series of articles in the Argo in which he explained that entire theory and how but to make sure that the president didn't take offense at that demolishing of the apple of his eye, he said, since the president was a smart guy, he assumed that the president knew from the beginning that that would be the effect. Tyranny, you see. And when the president took umbrage at that, Tony was again surprised. He reduced the entire edifice to rubble, and it died a lingering death shortly thereafter. So that's the first story. The second one has already been touched on, but I got a new story in human sexuality. And this is a true story. I was here for all these. I saw all these things with my own eyes. This is the great human sexuality caper. Tony was teaching human sexuality, I think it's fair to say, probably somewhat less antiseptically than it has been taught since he first initiated the program. And the rumor got out that he was showing porno flicks to his students in human sexuality. And I think the reason the rumor got out is at that time, the reserve shelf of the library was located on a few shelves right behind where the operators that ran the phone system worked. And it turned out that the operators were selectively auditing portions of Tony's human sexuality course. And they let the word out that there were porno flicks in there. Now, Woody Trombley, again, in his attempt to head off, I was there at a lunch table down in Lower C Wing. Trombley didn't want to really say to you, really want to do this, because that isn't what you do with bright young faculty. So he tiptoed up to the end of it with Tony, and he said, just asked matter-of-factly, what are you doing in human sexuality? Well, you see, Tony, the ridiculous censor started to tickle Tony again, and he suspected, probably rightly, that what the vice president was after was a course in human sexuality that had no mention of sex in it, which probably offended Trombley a little bit. So Tony had to help him out, and the way he had to help him out, without Trombley even asking about the porno flicks, he just said, what do you do in that course, Tony? And Tony rushed right in, grinning from ear to ear, and said, I show him a lot of porno flicks. I show him a lot of porno flicks. And I remember Trombley said, oh my God, his worst fears confirmed. Tony, did you at least ask the kids to sign permission slips or something, he said. And Tony, chewing vociferously and grinning beatifically at the same time said, nah, Woody, don't worry about it. The kids love it. They love it, he said. And that was, of course, exactly what the vice president was worried about in the first place. That's the second story. I give you the great Brigantine Lions Club caper. I'm not sure about the truth of the cause of this, but I'll tell you what I was told on this. Tony was writing a column regularly for the Argo called the Faculty Corner, as I recall. And I gather that the suggestion had been made by the administration, since there was some reasonably rebellious and occasionally steamy stuff in the Argo in those days, that they might try to have more academic articles, because it was in fact a college paper. Okay, so Tony had to respond to that. He felt morally compelled to explain to them in some way that they would understand that that was an inappropriate attempt to encroach upon the freedom of the press. And so he complied to the request that he write something more academic. He gave him a good stock and multidisciplinary academic article. And that is, he worked out an illustration of a statistical principle, and as the case study in the statistical principle, he used data on the number of reasonably energetic elements that are called forward in the male sexual response. I won't get more detailed than that, as an illustration of the statistical principle he wanted to deal with. Now, I might not have found out about this story, and you might not have found out about it, except that at the same time, they used to send me off campus because I was one of the few faculty members who had short hair and owned a necktie in the old days. So they would send me around to the various service clubs to explain to these people that it was safe to send their children to the hippie college. And unfortunately for me, I was out visiting with the Brigantines Lions Club, and the Argo, the issue of the Argo in which Tony's article appeared, made it to the Brigantine Lions Club just before I did. Okay, so I was standing up there explaining to them what a wonderful college it was and how bright and well-credentialed the faculty were, in spite of the fact that they sometimes looked a little strange. And I had hardly gotten into that when a guy leapt up in the back row, read several quotes from Tony's article on sexual response on the part of males, and started to scream, "What the hell kind of a college is this?" And there was an ugly roar that reverberated throughout and I began to edge nervously toward the door. Now, I thought about using Tony's line, you know, no offense intended, just having a little fun, but I thought it might put me in physical danger, so I let it go by. The last one, in his finest hours, and last always brings me to the end here, make you happy. This is the cooling out the faculty caper. Stockton started as a bit of a love-in because it was the 60s. And we were all going to get together and come to automatic consensus. And we didn't even want to be affiliated in the early days. It's a true story with a professional association because we thought it would divide the community, okay? But then, of course, we had a president who began to insist on evaluation of the faculty somewhere in the first year before people had figured out where the restrooms were. He did give the famous speech about how there ought to be blood on the walls and a good personality. And this was a 60s faculty. I mean, these are the guys who had just a few short months before had been occupying the president's office at their own university and calling all their friends in Honolulu on his phone, okay? So they heard this kind of talk, and they were going to put up with that kind of crap. So relationships were deteriorating between the president and the faculty. And Woody Trombley, enter again, he was the reason why I introduced him here. He thought it was essential that they kind of cool out the faculty. So he talked Bjork's, true story, into coming to what is now Alton Auditorium, was the A-Wing Lecture Hall, to sort of explain to the faculty that we were all on the same side. And Trombley was seated just in front of me. He was a tall, thin guy who sort of sat on the back of his neck most of the time, slouched down in his chair, and he was just ahead of me there. And Bjork started out all right, and he started to explain how we were all in this together, but then he couldn't help himself, and he slipped back into a notion in which he made the oft-made argument of his that his responsibility to the taxpayers of New Jersey was to make sure that he had the best faculty member in the country in every position at the college. And if he were to discover that there was anyone in the entire goddamn country who was better at your position, it was his obligation to fire you and bring that person in. Okay, and so the atmosphere was deteriorating. And Trombley's head was sinking lower and lower in his chair. Only his head showed above the back of the, okay. And after we'd had a lot of that, Marino stood up in the back. See, his ridiculous censor set him off again. He couldn't help himself. He had detected a logical inconsistency in the president's argument, and he felt compelled to explain that to him so he wouldn't make that mistake again. And he stood up at the back and he said, "Okay, now I understand that you're really concerned with evaluation. So I have a question for you. When do we get to evaluate you, you son of a bitch?" Okay? Well, the bottom fell out of the meeting, and it all went to pot. It all went right down the drain. And of course, Tony's response was probably, no offense intended. I just thought I had to. In this case, there probably was some offense intended. Okay. Well, in any case, those are my stories. And what I want to do, I want to get to the toast part of this. So I do toast Tony Marino for the fearlessness and for the laughter. And if anything I have said is inaccurate or offensive, I just want to say no offense intended.
With the recent email circulating about collective bargaining, I just want to let you know I am the agent for my father. for the future negotiations with the college presidents. I am taking 90% of him because I think he's well-deserved after that talk with, from Bill. There's a couple things, and Dan, I don't know if you're going to say this. My father had a really good relationship with the first president of the college, Dick Bjork. So much that very mysteriously, the college president's log cabin, which was on the other side of the lake by Seacourt, burned down one night. My father says to this day that he had nothing to do with it. Maybe Dan will say that later. But there's another issue with Dick Bjork and my father that involved Dick Bjork's wife. And if you're around Stockton long enough, you know the old Louis Bar. Now, when I was a student at Stockton in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a German Shepherd in that bar that would take your money. That's how high class this place was. Well, Dick Bjork brought his wife to Louis Bar. And my father was standing around there, and probably in your early 30s at that time. Somebody grabbed Bjork's wife's ass. And my father just happened to be right there when she turned around. Well, there's many reasons why he didn't get tenure. I think that was, as Leah said, top 10, you know, that was up top. I'm going to bring up another veteran of the Stockton faculty, Cindy Bierbauer.
Well, this is a very impromptu idea of mine to say a few words.
I just need,
What?
whoever has a green tracker that parked in front of the ambulance bay, you need to move it, because if the ambulance has to go, you're in the way. Anybody have a green tracker, green car that's parked in, I'm sorry, a green car parked in front of the ambulance bay? Oh, there we go.
Okay. A few additional comments to, I don't know how I can top what Shelby and Bill said, but it does follow Tony's human sexuality course a little bit. And the background to this is the Mayflower Hotel, where the college opened up because of a construction strike on the main campus, was in the red light district. Tennessee Avenue was not exactly a high-class part of Atlantic City. And I remember the first year taking my grade school-age children to college early evening activities and blindfolding my daughter. Don't look, Emily, don't look, Emily. When my son, a couple of years older, how come that lady is in that short red skirt and those funny looking tall boots and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Don't look, kids, don't look. And yes, we were indeed in the red light district. And I, as a very sheltered, naive person, had my eyes quite open. Where this applies to Tony, other than getting ideas for his course, my PhD was in an abstruse area called human population genetics. And the one course I had never had in grad school that I really, really, really needed was Tony's, demography. So he mentioned to me in passing that Cornell Sociology Department was offering a National Science Foundation summer postdoc in demography. And I'm eternally grateful for Tony for getting me there. It was one of the outstanding professional activities of my life. I learned a great deal. I still have very fond memories of that summer 38 years ago. It helped me a lot with my career. But while there, and the Cornell faculty said, gee, you're a colleague of our protege, Anthony Marino. How is he doing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He owes us 2 or 3 chapters on his PhD dissertation. And what can you do to get him to finish? Well, their suggestion was, Sandy, you dress too conservatively. Go back to Stockton, get a pair of real high, shiny patent leather black boots, a nice short red skirt, swagger into his office, wave a big stick and say, Tony, get your dissertation done. And I apologize, Tony, because my wardrobe is too conservative. I failed. So that's my little story. And thanks for coming.
Before we bring up Lynn Stiles, so Lynn, that's your cue. Part of being a Republican is knowing the county executive, but also knowing the county executive means knowing his chief of staff, Howard Kyle. And Howard Kyle and my father have a long history of talking politics and exchanging emails. So on the mass email that I put out to his friends, Howard says, I can't go that night, but I want to make a proclamation on behalf of the county. So I picked it up today. I don't want to read all of the whereases, but I'll do one to segue into other 2 that I think you'll like. Whereas, as an impressionable young man, Anthony Marino was greatly influenced by President John F. Kennedy and heeded his call to public service by joining the Peace Corps and becoming an activist and ardent member of the Democratic Party. And whereas, despite the lure of Reaganism in the 1980s and numerous defeats at the polls in local elections, my father did run for freeholder, along with Steve Persky and Nelson Johnson. Both become Superior Court judges, authors of now an HBO series. The other one is now here in Egg Harbor City getting roasted. So despite the lure of Reaganism in the 1980s and numerous defeats at the polls and local elections, Anthony Marino remained steadfast in support of the Democratic Party principles such as bigger, more intrusive government and higher taxes. And whereas, despite sharp differences of opinion between Anthony Marino, whom the local Republican organization endearingly refers to as the loyal opposition, and the mainstream voters of Atlantic County, he has earned great respect and admiration, as whereas Anthony Marino will be honored tonight by the Stockton Federation for Teachers. Now, therefore, I, Dennis Levinson, County Executive, proclaim today as Anthony Marino Day in Atlantic County. So I give that to you. But at this time, I want to call up Lynn Stiles. Lynn and my father, again, have a long history, and it was funny that Lynn moved out of Linwood shortly after my wife and I moved into Linwood, literally a block away.
I don't think that's an association.
No, but that's all right. It's Lynn Stiles.
Tony. A few notes, but I'll probably forget about them anyway. A lot of things were said that I was going to mention, so I'm going to have to play off of them. But I think you've gotten a good feeling for Tony when he was young, had a little bit more hair, at least was darker anyway. And I didn't join in 71, 73, so I came when Tony was really full steam ahead. And, I remember a number of those presentations with Dick Bjork and the various college committees and so on. And Tony was just right out there. He just really didn't hesitate for a moment. I think it was actually with a passion, almost like it was a sport. I wonder sometimes, Tony, if you got your early training in Venezuela with the Peace Corps, your approach to authority was definitely different. But you're really a wonderful role model because you had this compassion and dedication and love of teaching, and just the willingness to tell it as you saw it. It was really a wonderful role model. And with this compassion and this dedication and this candor, you showed us how this could lead to unemployment. No, that's true. That's true. I remember the first strike. And Ralph Bean organized us and made us feel like we had to stick together. And Tony had the job of talking to the local various unions, AFT, associated unions, and others. And he really got them on our side. I mean, they were really, really behind us. And they wanted to know whose bones they should break and what administrators and scabs they should take on. And I think Tony really didn't realize how effective he was. I just can imagine how much you had to talk your way out of that one and tell him we really didn't want that to happen. But that was really true. We were very interested in getting that support. One of the things that, I don't know, is Ralph or you, Tony, but thought it was really, I would really be good at setting up strike headquarters. And I think really it was about, you know, they said it was a really cushy job. You know, you stay in a warm building, you make soup, and, you know, make sure the guys on the line can stay warm. But what they really thought was I was probably the only dumb guy who was willing to connect up the telephone wire. Now, let me tell you, at that time, they had already announced the telephone number. So you can imagine now, I'm laying on the floor trying to put these wires on the connector, and the phone's ringing every couple of seconds. Now, maybe you don't know this, but every time the phone rings, that's a 90-volt signal. I didn't always have this curly hair back here. Those were the good old times, right? I just want to say that I really want to thank you for being the person to walk with a target on your back. Because, you know, the rest of us look moderate in comparison, you know, really helped a lot, you know. I didn't really want to go, there are a lot of stories you've heard, I don't want to go into those, but I really want to thank you, Tony, because you really were a good role model, and you gave us the courage at times, by your example, to stand up and tell it as it is, as we see it. Thanks.
As Dawn sets up a PowerPoint that Michael Frank will present, and then shortly thereafter a DVD by Alan Lacey, and I think Alan Lacey, who's retired now from Stockton, was my father's first dean at the time, or he was a dean during the time. Lynn alluded to my father's union days, and just for some of those faculty who may not remember or may not know, my father was the SFT's first delegate on the Central Labor Council of Atlantic and Cape May County. After my father was, I like to say, let go by the college, in '76 he became a full-time staff rep for the Council of State Colleges, local AFTs, based up in Union, New Jersey. And during those 3 years up there, he was an organizer and lobbyist for the council, and union membership more than doubled. In '77, he took a short leave of absence from his council position to manage at the time the successful campaign for state senator of that's not me, that's Mike Frank. But he managed the successful campaign of then Senator Steve Persky. Now up there, and this isn't a plant, but this reminds me, Toast and Roast of Merlino. My wife and I met 14, 15 years ago, right? 15 years ago. I have it on the inside of my ring. It's like ages. My father and my father-in-law have known each other from politics. My father Republican, my father-in-law Republican, my father a Democrat. So they've known each other for a long, long period of time. So my wife came home and says, oh, I met this fella named Alex, Marino. And my father-in-law today is a state superior court judge. And back then, 15 years ago, he was in line to take over the judgeship. So it really wasn't prudent for his daughter to start dating a Merlino, if you know this area. So they sat her down, and she remembered it was Marino. Thank God for me, because I married a very beautiful woman, and thank God for her father-in-law, who became a state superior court judge. So, Michael, I don't know where you're going with Merlino, but this should be interesting.
Okay. Actually, I'm here to talk about this century as opposed to 500 or 600 years ago. I sat down and I started to think about the stuff that Tony has done for this union. This is a union affair, and I think it's important that we think about some of those things. Can I have the next slide? He is, without question, a founding father of Stockton. He's a founding father of the union. Ralph Bean couldn't have done what he did when he did it without Tony's assistance. After Tony got bounced out of Stockton, he scored a job with the statewide union and organized and set up, I don't know how many of you are aware of that, but he couldn't find a job anywhere else, and that's where he went. More recently, he's been a vice president of adjunct faculty member here at the college. Done an absolute fantastic job. As you've heard from many people, he is a politician extraordinaire. There's no question about it. I heard during the start of the evening that some of the older faculty members had talked about a position you had involving IUDs. Any truth to that? Yes, he says yes. We're not going to go there.
But it was in a foreign country.
Oh, it was in a foreign country, I see. Okay. I wish I had that earlier this evening. I could have done something with that. But Tony is a really great guy. He was willing to travel, I know, with me and other people up to Trenton for these negotiations. He's a wonderful traveling companion in a car because he can talk and talk and talk. He's just absolutely fantastic. And the other thing that's really notable about Tony is he is our permanent master of ceremonies. He's absolutely fantastic. And as I'm doing this, I get charged up and I start to look at what Merlino has done for our area. And so I start and look at some Philadelphia stuff. And then I come across this, which is really absolutely incredible. And it turns out that, next slide, he is really bad for business. Can you play this? Click on the, yeah, that's it. No, we don't have a sound? That's why you don't do PowerPoint. Anyway, Tony, it turns out...
Michael. His name's Marino. It's not Merlino.
Oh, never mind, excuse.
Sorry, Tom.
Before Dawn cues up the DVD, after my father, I don't know, he left the union up in Union, came back down here because he always had sand in his shoes. He was appointed as deputy director of the Atlantic City Expressway. By that time, Steve Persky helped him get a job. And ever since, during his time with the South Jersey Transportation Authority, and I'm starting to see here, Dad, there's a repetition to your career. See, during his time with the Expressway, as he was getting paid more, he was getting demoted every year. And
That's when the Republicans took over.
yes, but the Republicans were smart enough to pay him while they demoted him. But there's a great story about my father. There's two great stories. I'll give you one. My father claims that he was away on vacation. Now, probably with me. When he came back and there was an issue with a disabled individual on the expressway, that my father did basically all the hiring and firing on the expressway during his time there, or a majority of his time there. And there was a problem with a disabled man that they hired. And it's my favorite story, and I can't tell it as much as as great as my father can. But it involved a toll collector. And if you know anything about tolls back in the 70s, before Easy Pass, my father also claimed that he's the father of Easy Pass in the state of New Jersey, or in the Northeast. Yes, that's very good. But in the world. It was funny, every once in a while I'll get an email from...
I heard he invented the internet.
Talks about, there's a guy, and if you understand about being a toll collector, you have to have all your appendages. This guy didn't have any fingers. So the story goes of a fingerless toll collector. And the reason my father brought him in, and he told the fella, he said, we got to couldn't fire him because we'll find you another job. And the guy said, why? He says, you can't make change. All you can do is give dollar bills. So the great story of the fingerless toll collector is that, all he had was a nub. And it's hard to give dimes and quarters back when you only had a nub. So they transferred him and then basically when Egg Harbor became a bill plaza, they put him back in there because it was easier. Are we ready with Alan Lacey? All right, go ahead.
Good evening. This is Alan Lacey. Some of you may remember me, some of you may not. I was here at Stockton in the Dark Ages, but I left when I renounced philosophy and ideas, and I'm now running the smallest arboretum in the world. But I'd like to talk about Anthony Marino, or Tony, as we affectionately called him back in those days. It may not be known that I was briefly his dean. And you're familiar, of course, with his subsequent career after leaving Stockton, how, first of all, he worked for an organization that was countering the education organization of the public school teachers in the state of New Jersey, and thus he was foreshadowing the important work that Governor Christie is doing today. Then this was followed, of course, by his road fetish, but I'd like to talk really about his research interests, particularly the ones that he did not pursue after leaving Stockton. His publications include, let me see here, got the exact title, Family Fertility and Sex Ratios in the British Caribbean, CAP Surveys in the Politics of Family Planning, and Radio and Family Planning in the Dominican Republic. What Anthony discovered in his sexual researches in the Caribbean was that family planning takes place not only between male and female, but also between male and male, where the family planning is pretty much taken care of, and between female and female. But he discovered another category. You know that, of course, that the contraceptive pill is based on the yam. The yam is not a human. The yam is other. And what Anthony was exploring was the relationships between males and females and this other category. A very important research. He looked into the sex ratios, which is just really a euphemism for sex, between human beings and watermelons. So, with no more ado, I would like to say welcome, Tony, and good luck.
There's an overriding theme that where my father gets demoted, gets fired, and sex. So before we bring up one of his longtime friends and one of the first editors of the Argo, Dan McMahon, earlier today I went to ratemyprofessor.com because I wanted to really feel how the students felt about my father. He talks over you all the time and is obsessed with sex. And will tell you how his pacemaker saved him 5 times. I really can't stand this man. He is arrogant and runs his mouth about everything but sociology. All he does is talk about himself. He uses disgusting sexual remarks about everything. And he's like 60s, and he's like 60. If you want to hear how wonderful his life is and how well off he is, well then waste your money here. I like this one. Why is this man a teacher? He does not know how to spell. He assigns the chapters to students to outline and talk about it in his class, so he doesn't have to teach. All he talks about is how it's like to be an Italian American. But there is some positive. He's cocky, but sure does teach you a lot. Love him. Very good. A funny and interesting class. He can be a little tough about grading. Knows what he's talking about and backs it up with stories and personal experience. Tony's the man. Expert opinion, insight, and good teaching. Tony has some very great experiences. Fortunate to hear his stories. Very interesting person. That was by Leah's ex-boyfriend. But this is the best, and this is going to segue into Dan McMahon. Great tan. Well prepared, but odd clothes. Looked like he lost his luggage somewhere. Dan McMahon.
Just so you know, I wrote about half of those. I also parked my car in front of the ambulance on purpose because Tony, as you know, has had at least 10 heart attacks, and I didn't want the ambulance to be, and the rescue squad to be away during this period. So that was all a setup. I want to take a few minutes to review a little bit of Tony's life. Tony and I met in 1965 on the beach in Venezuela. A lot of you don't know that. I was kind of staggering around, and we re-met in 1971 when I became the first editor, and I'll correct Alex. I was not one of the editors. I was the first editor of the Argo. Consequently, I got to know Tony very intimately because he was our first columnist. Tony was born a poor Hispanic child. He got his GED in 1964. He was the first person to take online courses at Cornell in 1965. These dates are very accurate. I checked them with Tony. You know how he is about data and statistics. They gave him credit for his endless emails. A lot of you didn't know that they had email in '65, but Tony was one of the first, and he wrote tons of emails even back then, and they gave him life credit for those emails. They're still giving him credit. He was married in 1970, and he tried to unionize husbands. It didn't work, so he fled to Venezuela. In Venezuela, he tried to unionize prostitutes. He had a run-in with Hugo Chavez's father, and he fled from Venezuela in 1969. He came to Stockton in 1971, where he tried to unionize the faculty. He fled Stockton in 1975. He moved to North Jersey. He actually unionized Union, New Jersey. He actually worked in Union, New Jersey. I visited them there several times. In 1980, he fled North Jersey, took a job with Steve Persky where he tried to unionize political candidates. That didn't work either. He fled Steve Persky, as many did. He took a job at the AC Expressway because he was a pesky pal. Some people say he was a Persky pal. I call him a pesky pal. He unionized toll takers and motorists alike. He fled the expressway. He also worked for Jim Whalen, and he tried to unionize the Whalen campaign. In 2003, Tony had a heart attack and died. It's true, on the Ocean City Boardwalk. He tried to unionize heaven and hell. It didn't work. He was resuscitated and he fled back to Earth. My best friend, Tony Marino.
How do you follow Dan McMahon, Lynn Stiles, Bill Daly? What?
If I go, I may slit my throat.
You want me to get you a cup? No. All right, I want to bring up his wife, Rosalie Valente.
Well, first of all, this is really difficult to follow such great speakers. And I'm not a college professor, so I'm really not used to this. But I've been married to Tony for a while, so that gives me a little bit of experience. Him having to go to the bathroom is nothing new. Anytime I want to say something, he's gone. Anyway, Tony refers to me as his current wife. I want you to know that Tony is full of optimism. I refer to myself as Rosalia Valenti. Notice, no Marino. I do use the Marino when appropriate, but I get embarrassed also. Shortly after we were married, which is how long, Tony? Don't answer, you don't know the answer. That's okay. Shortly after we were married, we met a former student of Tony, and this is a theme that's been going on tonight. She came up to us and she looked at me and she seriously, I mean really seriously said, and we've been married 25 years, she said to me, "Your husband taught me all that I knew about sex." And newly married, I looked at her, okay, I smiled, and she added, I was in his human sexuality course. And then I wondered what criteria Stockton has for instructors. But I figured bigger and better things were ahead. But, you know, that's why I wanted to go to the bathroom, because my wife gets up. No. But I wanted to let you know that I helped make Tony the man that he is today, and the man that is roasted today. And he doesn't give me a lot of credit, but I'll tell you why this happened. Tony's a confident, is this working? Tony is a confident and optimistic man, a great passionate talker, a storyteller, and a statistician. I helped. And let me tell you why. Confident and optimistic. I'm an Italian immigrant, right from the country. I was raised that men are adored, catered to, and served. My mother cooks what Tony wants, serves what Tony wants, cleans after Tony, never allows him to touch anything, allows him to watch anything he wants on her TV, only TV, and if she physically could, would kneel down and take off her shoes. I'm sure Tony feels I'm going to turn into her someday. I may, but he's an eternal optimist. The food is important to Tony as it is to Italians, but I found out something about Tony really quick that saved the day. It's quantity, not quality. One of my first meals, 3 hours cooking real Italian sauce. Tony tasted it, and said, "It's just as good as ragu." And he's gotten ragu ever since. Passionate talker. Well, as an Italian, I was raised that passionate talking is Passionate talking, it's not yelling. We're talking passionately. And all our males talk and gesture passionately. And we were told as females, that doesn't mean they're right. Just let them talk passionately. The most important thing you need to know about how I enabled Tony to be the man that he is that I'm a licensed therapist. I have been trained to listen. And every once in a while nod. And keep listening. He really thinks what he says is important. Anyway, this allows him to talk and talk and talk, and I'm fine, because I'm listening, listening, and listening. The storyteller. There was never let the truth get in the way of a good story. Didn't I hear that on the Boardwalk Empire? As soon as I heard that line, I said, that's my husband. He's a storyteller because I forget things. I forget names. I forget stories, right? I forget things. I really do. So he tells the story again and again and again. Somewhat the same, somewhat different. But he's having a good time, and I'm forgetting the last time he said it, so it's okay with me. The last, not least, statistician. Well, again, I'm going to have to tell you, I'm a trained clinical therapist, not an experimental psychologist. So math and I never really did get along. I blank over with numbers. I don't think they're important. Tony thinks they're the most important thing in the world. So it goes like this. When I was having my daughter, Leah, labor pains, first time ever for me, we're down the expressway, giving birth, heading to Atlantic City Hospital. My loving husband, trying to reassure me, gives me the statistical analysis of the women going through this at this moment. He thought it would help me through this. I let it happen. I could have killed him. You wouldn't have had any more statistics since then. I am very sorry to say that I've enabled Tony to achieve this fine roasting moment, but that's why we got along for 25 years. But I also would like to toast him as a wonderful man, a caring husband, a caring father. Yes, with very high standards, and yes, he will correct everything that I have said wrong, but at the end of the day, he's a very kind and understanding heart.
If you want to watch my father argue, ask him for directions. More specifically, when his brother Don and him are at Christmas dinner and ask for directions, because it's a sight unseen. But also at Christmas dinner, it's also funny when you see his granddaughter Madeline and his grandniece Gianna, two young girls under the age of 10, play, and he's putting in their hands. And my wife always likes to say that our daughter Madeline and niece Gianna, they have their way with Tony. And you've never seen Tony quiet when you see him with those two young girls. Before I bring up John Seawright, this will be my last time at the podium because I know John will give it over to my father, and yeah, good luck. And remember, we prolonged this because he's really got to pee, so it's a way we can quiet him. But people ask me, you know, oh, your father's a great guy, he's engaging, he's funny, he tells great stories, and I say, yeah, try living with him for 23 years. But you know what, those 23 years are great, and I love him, and I appreciate him, and he's a great babysitter, because my three kids just love Pop-Pop, because Pop-Pop takes them to Wendy's, Pop-Pop takes them to Friendly's, and our youngest son, Mac, he's 5 now, and he melts with Pop-Pop. So, John Seawright, floor is yours, my friend.
I think it was Dan talked about, no, it was somebody else talked about Rate My Professor and read about Tony. I did a little bit of research going back over old Argos, Mr. McMahon, reading those Argos and, of course, the columns by Tony. And one of the columns that I came across, and by the way, I should thank Dick Colvin for the records that we have of the early years of this college down in the library. It's a wonderful collection of every Argo, every Stockton Chronicle, and if you really want to be masochistic, I think every meeting of the Board of Trustees, the minutes, the agendas, they're all there, and they're all very accessible. But one of the things I came across was very early, there was a survey done by some students that the Argo published that had to do with best professors and worst professors and best administrators and worst administrators. And the best professor was Tony Marino. And about 2 weeks later, Tony, in his column, took the Argo to serious task about the methodology that the study used and what a disservice it was to publish it. And he said not a word about who was the best professor or the worst this or the worst that, but it was just a sign of, to me, it just said a lot about Tony. That he, I think, was embarrassed by what was there and the names that were published and the lacks in the study, and he made it very clear and said nothing about himself whatsoever. And I also, in going back over those columns, I noticed that there were certain themes that kept reoccurring. And Tony, he clearly in the early years of the college, he was obsessed with certain things, and you've heard a bit about this. He certainly was obsessed about this organization called the College Council. He was very obsessed with the Board of Trustees, very obsessed with Dick Bjork. And yet, if you went through these columns, he also was a real visionary in those early days. He was identifying issues that were extremely important and that we would talk about for many, many years. He early on did write something about the student evaluation of teaching, the need for that, the necessity for that, the importance of that students ought to have a voice, a serious voice in evaluating what they were paying for. In 1972, he wrote a column urging that bus service be established to Stockton. I don't know at that point if he had any designs on his eventual career with the South Jersey Transportation Authority, but he was very right about what he was saying in terms of making the college accessible and getting service established. Of course, that was 1972. I think it was probably 25 years before we got bus service to Stockton. And of course, he was an early advocate for the evaluation of administrators and wrote about the need to establish proposals for doing that, and you've heard some of what came from that. And he also was a bit obsessed about population and overpopulation and control population. And of course, you've heard about the sex. He was, wrote a good bit about sex and also about being Italian American. But if you look at them in total, it's a wonderful group of columns, and it shows Tony at his funniest and at his best. I have the privilege tonight of making the presentation to Tony of the union's special annual recognition for meritorious and extraordinary service, something we call the Dusty Award. The award is named after Ralph Bean, our second president, and a man who served our locals so well for many years. Ralph became known to some members of his family as Dusty. And tonight, Tony's going to receive the 11th Dusty Award. It's the Stockton's Federation of Teachers version of the Oscar, and it's prized by those of us who have them. But first, I want to pause and ask that we take a moment to remember how the Dusty came to be. It was the summer of 1997, and Ralph Bean was being sued by the college president for libel and slander because of a letter he had written to the Board of Trustees about our president. It was a very serious matter, and the stakes were high. Paul Lyons, a member of our executive committee and a very active union member, came up with the idea of having a roast and toast. A roast and toast to show support for Ralph, and a roast and toast to say to the Stockton community that we as a union are going to stand together and solid and behind our president, and we are not going to let him be taken down. It was a great success, that roast and toast. It was a rainy night in November, actually 23 years almost to the day that we had our first strike in 1974. A strike that was really all about establishing credibility for our union, and a strike that Ralph was very instrumental in building at Stockton and keeping us together through some difficult moments. Ralph received our support, and we gave him an award. And the college, I think, got the message, and within a matter of weeks, the matter was settled out of court. Paul Lyons also carried forward the idea that what we did for Ralph is something that ought to become a tradition and something that we would do each year and honor somebody from the union who had made significant service and worthy of the award. And I think with all the levity that we've had and the laughter that we've had tonight, that we need to take a few moments and just reflect back on those who have gone before us and those who have made this night possible.
Oh, it's a phallic symbol.
He may not have feelings in his hand, but the wit is still there.
Reminds I'm just going to say a few words because we want to turn it over to the wonderful Stockton Faculty Band. Thank you, John, for giving me this. It reminds me of that Seinfeld proctologist episode. I really don't want to say many things, despite what you heard from the people who have defamed me. But I'm a lucky guy. I've had many, many great experiences in my life. Unfortunately, tonight was not one of them. But as Dan and others have alluded to, I've had a history of cardiac problems, and in fact, was the only true thing Dan said. I did, in fact, die on the Ocean City Boardwalk. It was 03, 7 years ago. And the records say I was prostrate laying there for 6 minutes before the fire emergency team came back. In the meantime, someone, still anonymous, had been providing CPR to me to keep, apparently, my air moving through my body, although my heart didn't start up again until they gave me the external defibrillator about 6 to 7 minutes after the first phone call. And I often think today that, as I heard all the speakers, I wish they hadn't. I mean, I live for this. This is what I live for, right, Leah? Right? Remember what I asked you? You don't remember.
Oh.
Okay. Anyway, I could say a lot of things, but about who preceded me, but it'd be similar to what the Israelis have been saying about the Iranians. So I really don't want to get into that kind of stuff. The reality is, it's been a great night. I welcome all of you here. Thank you for coming, especially my Mayflower compatriots. You've heard from Shelby and Bill and Sandy, and in the crowd is also Don Plank and Dick Colby, Fred Mensch. Fred was one of the original signers of the SFT charter back in 1971 or 72. 16 of us started the union. The union was always important to me, and it should be important to all of you today, especially what the world has come to. Tim, as your current union president, I follow on the faculty email the things he writes, and his wonderful interchange with Herman. And John alluded to the 74 strike. There was also a strike in 79 that Stockton didn't have to participate in because Tom Worth and I, the two staff agents of the SFT, of the statewide union, knew that Stockton was in the semester break at the time. So consequently, you guys didn't have to go on strike for that one. So there's been two major strikes. The state didn't buckle, but the state realized that it was dealing with a real live union of dedicated people through the various state colleges. In many ways, I'm glad I'm retired now because I think the next year or two, you're all going to be challenged with similar circumstances. And while it's no fun to have to look forward to the possibility of a job action, it may be the only solution to what is going on. But that'll be for you younger folks to decide. The veterans, we went through it. I see my good friend Alan Arcuri here. I thought you had died last week. Alan and I were on that picket line that somebody mentioned back in '74, and a confused young female student didn't know what was happening as we were parading in the road, and she almost took down the both of us. We were a lot younger and sprier in those days. We got out of the way. But an ally on the Stockton police force pulled her over and wrote her up a ticket for reckless driving. She contested it, and about 4 months later, we were in municipal court. And Alan and I were asked to testify, and we had already decided this poor young lady was probably just confused and meant no little harm to us. So we kind of told the judge that it was our fault, that we shouldn't have been in the middle of the street, etc. But I tell the story because some of you may have to do that in the near future, if not in a formal job action, but certainly in some kind of demonstration, because what you have, I would like to think us old-timers helped you get, and if you're going to keep it, you're going to have to struggle for it. It's like in the Atlantic City now, they're talking about doing away with the tough regulations because they work. That's like saying, I don't need an umbrella tomorrow because it kept me dry today when it rains, so I can throw the umbrella away. Unions are needed, unions need to be strong, and you need the solidarity, the brotherhood, the sisterhood of a union, so please, please stick together. The last thing I was asked to do, and he said he couldn't be here, Herman Satkamp asked me, as you know, I always have great relationships with presidents of the college. Herman just wanted you folks to be the first to know that tomorrow they will be announcing that the college has purchased Long Beach Island. That's all.
The views expressed today by the older Marino do not reflect the views of the younger Marino. As an administrator here at the college, I just want to put that out there because I think some of my bosses might be in the room. This is on video, so I'm looking directly at the camera. No, I do want, please do not leave. The faculty band has written 1 or 2 songs in dedication to my father and to your brother here, so to speak. So please respect the band. It's going to come up. Michael, come on up. Roger, Peter, David, Frank, everybody come on up and do your magic.
Well, at the risk of having everyone split, should we take a bathroom break, Tony, or what?
Yeah? Okay. All right.
Mike Frank did, during his wonderful PowerPoint presentation, talked about Tony as being the consummate MC, and I did want to mention that when the Stockton Faculty Band had the opportunity to play the House of Blues in Atlantic City, Tony in fact served as MC for that event, and yeah, that's right. Yeah, and in fact, it was interesting because we later found out that he hates music. Yeah.
That's why we did 2 tonight.
Right. So these are for you, Tony, given your feelings about music.
This is my favorite things, as if sung by Tony. Giving directions and union petitions, write printed maps with updated editions, rousing the people to fight for their dreams. These are a few of my favorite things. When they stole dump trucks and used the trash scoopers, while right in front of New Jersey State Troopers, all tales replete with exaggeratings. These are a few of my favorite things. Fingerless toll collectors on the expressway, right-wing politicos caught up in foul play, railing against Gingrich and all his ilk brings. These are a few of my favorite things. When the Dems lose, when the right wings, when I'm feeling sad, I simply remember my favorite things, and then I don't feel so bad. When the Dems lose, when the right wings, when I'm feeling sad, I simply remember my favorite things, and then I don't feel so bad. Giving directions and union petitions, write printed maps with updated editions, rousing the people to fight for their dreams. These are a few of my favorite things. When they stole dump trucks and used the trash scoopers, while right in front of New Jersey State Troopers, all tales replete with exaggeratings. These are a few of my favorite things. Less toll collectors on the expressway, right-wing politicos caught up in foul play, railing against Gingrich and all his ilk brings. These are a few of my favorite things. When the Dems lose, when the right wings, when I'm feeling sad, I simply remember my favorite so bad. All right, so that was the easy roast. One of the many things Tony invented. Okay, and now we've got Union Tony. Everyone should know this song. This one's sung to the tune of I Got Rhythm. Everyone knows that. And this is for Union Tony. And Tony, being such a great guy, done so much for the Union, done so much for all of us, where we are right now. And I appreciate especially his talk when he stood up here. Union Tony, here we go. Union Tony, true SFT. Come on, sing. He's our MC. Who could ask for anything more? Express with Tony, top padroning, still no phoning. Who could ask for anything more? Tony and Alex have their conflicts. They don't hang them round their door. He's got insight, fights the good fight, secured our rights. Who could ask for anything more? Union Tony, true SFT. He's our MC. Who could ask for anything more? Express with Tony, top patrolling, still no phoning. Who could ask for anything more? Tony and Alex have their conflicts. They don't hang them round the door. He's got insight, fights the good fight, secured our rights. Who could ask for anything more? Who could ask for? Who could ask for anything more? Yeah, Union Tony. All right, come on, folks.
All right, now you can go pee, Tony.